You might as well be, because you ain't going to do nothing about it. I'm happy for the rain. I consider this a good day because we got the rain and we were dry. That's a gardener's perspective. Book of Mark, chapter 14. We're quickly coming up on the end of the book of Mark. And I say once again that if you have a place in the Bible you'd like to study for Sunday school, feel free to recommend it. We'll take a look at it. Make no promises, but otherwise I'll just do whatever I think and we'll move on from there. Verse 56 is approximately where we had gone to as far as we'd gone, or something right in that area. It's we could refer to this as Jesus' trial, although using it, that's sort of a liberal use of the word trial. His guilt was a foregone conclusion. They'd already decided he was guilty before the trial began. And so the things that happen are skewed one way, and we've been reading about the things they were saying against him, and the fact that they brought witnesses to the trial who it's striking to me that when you know what you're about to do and you've got witnesses lined up, that you wouldn't see to it in your collusion to make sure that they all said the same thing, but that didn't happen. So Mark says, verse 56, many bear false witness against him, but their witness agreed not together. So even when you're doing a show trial or a kangaroo court, they wanted it to show that everybody said the same thing, and when they didn't, it sort of frustrated their efforts to make it look good. So there was an apparent effort to make this look as good as they could for the record, maybe, or for the people, I don't know, maybe to satisfy their own self. The Pharisees, one of their problems, it's a human failing that we have, is an attempt to make whatever we do, no matter what it is, appear good in the sight of other men. And you say, well, I care what other people think. Okay, but then there has to be a cutoff point where we say, well, not to the exclusion of doing the right thing. See, I should care what John thinks, but if I have to lie to satisfy John, I should draw the line, shouldn't I? I should say, no, I'm not going to lie now, just because he wants me, and he has to do the same thing. We have to have a standard, and so they had apparently dropped all standards. All they cared about was, how does this look? But they couldn't get witnesses to agree. And there arose certain and bare false witness against him, saying, we heard him say, I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and within 3 days I will build another temple, another made without hands. We already looked at that verse. He did not say that, but that's what they said he said. But, verse 59, but neither so did their witness agree together. So he brings up one of the specific accusations. And even in this, the two witnesses, so I imagine, this is just my imagination, I imagine they called in one witness at a time. And that's where the problem arose. They couldn't hear what each other was saying, so they couldn't get this right. So even in this, they were saying, no, that's not what he said. He said something else. So verse 60 says, and the high priest stood up in the midst. Now here's sort of the climax. And asked Jesus, saying, answerest thou nothing? So this is like a lawyer. He's sort of running this trial. And he's saying, you're not going to answer these accusations? Now, if the witnesses don't agree, why would you? There's no accusation yet. If everybody's saying you said this, no, he said that, no, he said this, why answer? Furthermore, this is a fulfillment of prophecy. Now, Mark doesn't really talk about it, but you can read this in the prophecies that when the Messiah comes and is, excuse me, accused, that he will, as a sheep before the shears, open not his mouth. And so so the interpretation of that is clearly that Jesus, not that he never said a word. That's not what that means when it said he opened not his mouth. It's saying he did not protest and he did not defend himself. He did not say, okay, I can prove to you that I don't deserve to die. He didn't do that. He could have, but he didn't. And he didn't say, you shouldn't do this to me. You're doing wrong. You're treating me wrong. He did not. So that's what it means when it says, like a sheep dumb before the shears, he opened not his mouth. So Jesus had some things to say. He did answer some questions, and he did speak on the cross later on. So this is a prophecy that he did not protest his accusations and his trial and his treatment. The Apostle Paul, later on, being persecuted, he did protest his treatment, and he did protest an attempt to kill him. So the difference is that there's a time and a place for that. And in this instance, in order for Jesus to fulfill what you and I needed, he must allow himself to have been accused, sentenced, and then put to death. Where the Apostle Paul, that didn't serve God's purpose and wouldn't have done me any good for Paul to have died. And I'm sure he died in his time, obviously. Answerest thou nothing? What is it which these witness against thee? So he's saying, what about these accusations? What you tell us about it? Well, again, these are not accusations yet. They're conflicting. So there is no need for Jesus to speak. But he held his peace, verse 61, and answered nothing. So now we get to the thing that I think the high priest probably had been waiting to do. This may take a little bit here now to talk about. Again, the high priest asked him and said unto him, Art thou the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? So I believe, my opinion, is that he knew, the high priest that is, knew that Jesus more or less must answer this question. That he would answer the question, and he knew how he would answer the question. And so the whole plan all along was to try to pin other things to him if they could and avoid this one. This is my opinion. But if we have to, we'll go to this. Now, in the scriptures that the Pharisees themselves said they believed, the Messiah would come. And here he sits, but he's not the Messiah that they wanted. We live in a world today, Jesus is not the Jesus people want. See, because the Jesus in the Bible believes in a literal heaven and a literal hell. And I don't want that kind of Jesus. The Jesus in the Bible is a righteous man and preaches righteousness and expects people to walk in righteousness. And we don't want that kind of Jesus. Somebody said, well, they're just sinners. They can't help it. Nonsense. God can't judge the world if the sinners can't do any better. Don't be a Calvinist. Yes, they can. And they ought to, and they should. You and I ought to, and we should. That's the Bible. That's the way the Bible represents it. Don't fall for that. The doctrines today are twisted. They've twisted the Bible into something it never says. And we sat there and read it in Sunday school and then turn around and say, well, they're just sinners. They can't do no better. Look, that makes absolutely no sense. Jesus walks into a place and says, You ought to have done this and ought to have done that. How can you say that to people who can't do no better? How can you use those? How can Jesus say that if they can't do any better? But he says, you ought to have done this and you ought to have done that, expecting them to have done those things. And the Old Testament is chock full of God saying, I'm against you and I'm mad at you. I'm upset with you because you ought to have done this and you didn't do it. And Jesus comes along and says the same things, and then we come up with a doctrine today that says, oh, they can't help it because they're sinners and they can't do no better. It's frustrating, and it frustrates God's intent. His intent is that we should see, just for example, that the only normal thing to do when it comes to the truth is to speak the truth. And everything else is an abnormality and a sin. That it is strange and foreign to God to be a liar. Because he doesn't do that. And he never created us to be that way. So that when we lie, just an example, when we lie, we're stepping away from a created order, the way God made us. That's why it's so bad. But we're so used to saying everybody lie that we just kind of accept it as, well, it's part of human nature. No, it's not. He never created you to be a liar. Me neither. So in this coming to Christ and saying, you see the whole setup. Are you the Christ? They know he's going to say he is because that's who he is, but he's not the Christ they want. And they're actually defying their own well-being. You ever see people do that? Despite what's good for them, they do the wrong thing. And so, in fact, God that's part of why I needed salvation, because that's what I was doing. Here sits God, the Son of God, and he's going to speak the truth to them, and they're going to use that to destroy him. So we're saying, you can't be the Messiah, but we believe that Messiah is coming. You've done everything that the Messiah would do and said he would do, but we won't have you for the Messiah. So what they're going to say is this: you're blaspheming God. This is what we're about to come to. You're defiling God's name by claiming to be his son, even though they have no proof to the contrary, but everything Jesus has done fulfills it. So I'm reaching for something to liken it to say, we believe this that in this person, and you've done everything to show that you are that person, but we're going to kill you for claiming to be that person that we expect to come. And it just, well, okay, who is going to show up and fulfill it then? Well, nobody ever did. They went on in their beliefs. The Pharisees didn't get religion. Some did, but as a whole, not. So that the Apostle Paul was being persecuted later on after the resurrection of Christ in the future, and the early church being persecuted by these same people. For what? For saying that Christ rose from the dead, that he really was the Messiah. So he says, art thou the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus said, I am. Now, he hardly ever said that. Okay, this was kind of, you finally asked me the open question. He'd hinted at it, he'd sort of said it here and there in the book. I'm talking about the book of Mark. Now, if you go to some of the other Gospels, a little bit more different take on it, different scenes and things. Mark's telling it from the point of view that God asked him to tell it. But he says, and ye shall, not just that, I'm not only saying that I'm the Christ, and ye shall see, talking about these men, you yourselves personally shall see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven. I ask you this, and I'm not going to answer it for you, but I want you to chew on it. How are these Pharisees, who undoubtedly died within a few years, because man only lives so long, how are they going to see Christ coming on these clouds if they're already dead? Ask yourself, chew on that a while. I'm going to move on. Then the high priest, excuse me, rent his clothes. Now this is it's a very Jewish thing to do. I hesitate to say it's fake, because it's sort of almost we're just not, we're Americans. I guess they're pretty expressive, but we're not quite that expressive. I've never rent my clothes, but this was something they did, and Job did it. When they brought him bad news, he rent his clothes. He tore his clothes. And I grabbed his shirt and I ripped the button, popped off, or whatever he had on. I've never done that. I've been really upset in my life, but that's just not the way I express myself. This was a very Jewish thing to do. It's cultural, and I believe that in this case it was somewhat of a show, that to rend his priestly garments was sort of you can't take that back. And everyone in the room, oh boy, But yet they wouldn't have wondered at it like we would. If you see somebody do that, you'd say, is he all right? Is he like mentally stable? We're not used to seeing people do that. But they would have understood what that meant. It was his way of saying, trial's over. I passed judgment. He rent his clothes and saith, what need we any further witnesses? So this is passing sentence. Well, you didn't need any witnesses in the first place because you didn't have any witnesses and you didn't want any witnesses. Just wanted to get to this. But he says, we don't need any more witnesses. You have heard the blasphemy. Well, it wasn't blasphemy if it's true. Well, they're claiming that it can't be true. No one could do this for them. No one could fulfill this for them. We believe in it, but we don't ever want to see anybody ever claim to be it. What think ye? And they all condemned him to be guilty of death. And in truth, if you go back to Leviticus, and you can find this even as late as the Kings, Naboth's vineyard. Remember Naboth's vineyard? They got a couple of witnesses and came along, and Ahab got. And the witnesses said, he blasphemed God and the king, took him out, stoned him, boy. That was what you did. Naboth didn't actually do that. But they got two people to say he did. But this was the command of Scripture. If you badmouth God, if you speak against God, Moses' command from God was take him out and stone him. So, now, they didn't take Jesus out and stone him, though, did they? So this has a twist to it that it's interesting. Have you ever heard it said that, well, they did that because they weren't allowed to stone people? Can you explain Stephen then? I thought they weren't allowed to stone people. They stoned that man to death. The Jews did. In the same town. Under the same Roman authority. Did they have power to stone? When the woman was taken in adultery, what did they have in their hands? Stones. I don't think that makes sense to say that they couldn't stone Jesus because it wasn't lawful. Now, it could have been what they were saying was, well, at our feast and all this, we don't do that. Could have been that. Well, Jesus already said, I'm going to be delivered in the hands of sinners, which is a way of saying it's not the Jews that are going to put me to death. Technically, it's the Gentiles, the sinners, the Romans, the sinners. Jesus said, if I be lifted up, I'll draw all men unto me, signifying what? Somebody said, well, that means when you praise God, you lift his name up. No, that's not what that means. He said, if I be lifted up, everyone knew what that meant. It means hung on a tree. The Jews didn't kill that way. They didn't execute that way. The Romans did. They knew that. So when he said, if I be lifted up, they all understood he's talking about being crucified. And Now, the problem was they just couldn't believe that was going to happen. But they understood what it meant. We're the ones that kind of get it all scrambled up because of our use of language. But they condemned him to be guilty of death. Now, then it kind of degrades into sort of a terrible thing that I really don't like to think on. But again, Isaiah prophesied of this. Verse 65, and some began to spit on him. There's nothing in the law that commands that. That was not something they had to do. This was something they felt like doing. And folks, we're talking about spitting on the king. And to cover his face, and to buffet him, and to say unto him, prophesy. In other words, who hit you? Who shoved you? And the servants, so they got the servants involved. The servants felt emboldened, and the servants did strike him with the palms of their hands. So they come along and join the fun, as it were, and begin to pummel him with their open palms. There was no need for that. There was no call for that, but sort of like wild beasts is a frenzy. So Jesus is pretty well beat up and shook up already before he even gets to the next step. Now I noticed something as I was studying this, reading this. It was verse 66. So it says, and as Peter was beneath in the palace, there cometh one of the maids of the high priest. Now, again, this is simply my opinion, but I want you to notice how it's written. So they're in the high priest's palace. We know that. It says Peter was beneath in the palace, so I take it to be at least a 2-story building. You're in Palestine in ancient times, so you have open air buildings with open windows. They don't have screens and storm windows. They don't have that. So I'm wondering if when you're sitting down below around the fire, warming yourself with the servants, and they start yelling and screaming and spitting and smacking and pushing and shoving and yelling, but you don't hear it. You're sitting down below. I wonder if you come up and say, hey, I think you're one of them. He's listening to that. Say, no, not me. I don't know that. I wondered about it because I had never noticed before that Peter was beneath in the palace. I always pictured him as being far away, but it sounds like he's right there. That you could hear the commotion. That you could hear the shouting. Do you really think the high priest stood up and rent his garment and said, what further need we hear his blasphemy? What do you think? I'm sure he was raising his voice. And when they condemned him to be guilty to death, they say, well, it's on a silent vote. Let's see who's. No, I think they were shouting, guilty, guilty. Prophesy. And they're hitting him. Hey, Benny, come in here. You want to hit him too? I think you could hear this commotion. And no doubt some of the servants, after they get done, they would come down and say, oh, we gave him what for? So he's nearby. And anyway, we go on, and there cometh one of the maids of the high priest. So this is one of the servant girls. And when she saw Peter warming himself, she looked upon him and said, and thou also was with Jesus of Nazareth. Now she didn't say, so let's get him. All she said was, you were with him. But he denied, saying, I know not, neither understand I what thou sayest. He said, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't even understand it. I don't know. I don't know anything about that. I don't understand that at all. I'm totally ignorant. I've never heard this before. Never heard this guy talk before. I don't know who you mean, what you mean. I don't know. He went quick. And he went out into the porch. So he went outside. He was inside. That's why I say I think he could hear. But he went outside. And the cock crew, the rooster crowed. And a maid saw him again. So it's a different girl, a servant. So servants are up and at him. They have to be because this is all being done in the middle of the night. So they made them either stay up or wake up or whatever and be up and about because we need people. These guards have to be fed. Guards just brought him in. They got to be taken care of. They got the fires going, keep everybody warm while we're waiting for them to come down, finish what they're doing upstairs. I don't even know if everybody even knew what was happening. But they knew that Jesus of Nazareth was an issue. And so they kept saying, I've seen you with him. So, and the maid saw him again, verse 69, and began to say to them that stood by, this is one of them. So you begin to see twice now this attempt to link him with Christ, with Jesus of Nazareth. So now it is starting to appear like they'd like to do something about it. Maybe the high priest would give me a gold star if I turned in one of his followers. I know what Jesus had said to Peter, but the fact that Jesus said that to Peter was foreknowledge. This was not destiny. This is not what Peter had to do. Peter chose to do this. Okay? So, well, Jesus said he would, so he had to do it. No, that's not what the Bible teaches. What the Bible teaches is that God knows it, and he can say ahead of time what's going to happen. That doesn't make it necessary. Okay? This is not God forcing Peter to do this. This is God saying, I see it. It's almost like watching TV ahead of time. It's like God, maybe he's got this way. I don't know how he does it, but he does it. And he can see what's going to come to pass. And Jesus could foresee it. And he said not only that, he said, it is written, I will smite the shepherd and the sheep, not just Peter. Everybody's going to scatter. And so, as Jesus is being smitten already, literally and figuratively, the sheep are scattering. And he lacks what it takes to say, I know Jesus. He doesn't have it. Nobody does. It doesn't mean that he's incapable of it, but without the Spirit of the Lord, you just, you're going to fold. It's not because you have to, it's just what men do because we're that weak. And he says, and he denied it again, is what it says in verse 70. And a little after, they that stood by, now it doesn't say who it is, just some people standing by, they that stood by said again to Peter, surely thou art one of them, for thou art a Galilean, and thy speech agreeth thereto. So I don't know. Now this can't answer. Somehow in his appearance, he must have looked like a Galilean to them. I don't know how that worked. But then they say also when you talk, you've got the right accent. Now that's something you can nail down. I can nail that down. That's easy. It's just like Southern accents, Eastern accents. You start guessing, You start guessing what city they're from and things like that. All you know is they don't talk quite the same. It's the same language, but it's just accent-wise. So they said, your speech shows you're a Galilean. Surely you are. You are a Galilean. Verse 71, but he began to curse and to swear, saying, I know not this man of whom ye speak. And the interesting thing is, after he cursed and swore, they said, well, they didn't ask him no more. They never brought it up no more. It still holds true today. If you begin to curse and to swear, people will make up their minds that you don't know Jesus. So, your mama was right. Stick a bar of soap in your mouth. Wash your mouth out. Don't do that. It's I just seen somebody pull up, John. That might be Dave. I don't know.
I'll check on that too.
Anyway, if you handle coarse talk, rough language, I heard a man the other day. This Christian said something, and it wasn't even this. And right away he jumped on it. Oh, and I thought he was supposed to be this good Christian. They're ready. They're ready. So we need as Christians to be. You say, well, I can't satisfy everybody. Probably not, but we don't have the right to say whatever pops into our head just because everybody else does. And we have a different calling, and it behooves us to. They have a way they say it now. They say, well, that person don't have no filter. Our filter should be the Holy Spirit and Bible. And sometimes you may not mean anything by what we say, but we still ought to study what we say a little bit as careful as we can and think about it as much as we can. Brother Turner was a man that was slow to speak. I've known several people like that in my life, men and women. Now, you might have, maybe you were standing by and said, well, he don't answer right away because he don't know. Sure about that? Or is it because they were contemplating before they gave that stupid answer? We give stupid answers. And it won't hurt to wait and be patient and say, well, I mean, what's wrong with saying, well, let me think about that? What's wrong with that? Well, give me a minute. I'm thinking. Does everything have to be so quick? That's a lot of times what I'm saying by that is that's where we come up with some of the things we say that we shouldn't say. Because we try to answer too quick. We want to be Johnny on the spot. They're putting pressure on me. I got to answer now. Now, we all understand being under stress and somebody trying to make you mad and maybe saying something you shouldn't say. I'm not excusing that. I'm just saying we all can understand that. But a lot of times it's just from trying to be too quick to speak. So as the Bible says, be slow to speak, slow to wrath. But Peter, he was under stress. He was fearing, apparently he was fearing being associated with Jesus lest he be blamed and maybe be put on trial as well and treated the same way. And so he also wanted to convince them, stop asking me these questions. Stop asking me if I know Jesus. And so that's why it says, so he resorted, when you resort to cursing and swearing, you've gone too far. He cursed and swore, saying, I know not this man of whom you speak. So we're going to end with verse 72, which is the last verse of chapter 14. And the second time the cock crew. So the rooster crowed again. And Peter called to mind the word that Jesus said unto him, before the cock crow twice, thou shalt deny me thrice. And when he thought thereon, he wept. See, to say that he couldn't do no better, why weep? He wept because he knew he did the wrong thing. He wept because he knew he'd failed in all of his talk and all of his bluster and all of his, proclaiming what he was going to do. He didn't live up to it. And though he ought to have done what was right, it was also the right thing to weep. It was appropriate time to weep because you saw I failed the Lord. I said I was going to die with him if that's what it took. And when the chips were down, he started cursing and swearing, saying, I don't know the Lord. And then, as the Bible says, when he thought on it, he began to think on what Jesus had said. He said he wept. One writer said he wept bitterly. It was tears that you didn't get any relief. You know how sometimes when you have an emotional response, like tears or something like that, afterwards you might feel better. Well, when you weep bitter tears, it doesn't help. It sort of drags on. Okay, Brother Ed, we're going to ask you, if you would, to dismiss us from this service, from this Sunday school, and ask the blessing on the service to come.